we had gotten a 911 call that there was somebody in the mall who had a gun and was threatening to shoot themselves and shoot other people. This is when we find out that there's pipe bombs, or according to the guy, there's pipe bombs inside the mall. And then we have reason to believe this because he also says that he has a bomb with him, and we see that there's a pressure cooker in the back of the car. And then he's just like, well, if you value your safety, he's like, I have other people that are coming here right now and they're going to shoot me. You're in the car with me. So if you value your life, I would get out.
Because it's very user-friendly for someone like me. I've tried a few other things and it didn't really work that well. But so, Tawny Meyers, thank you for joining us on the Mugshot podcast today. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, we really appreciate you stopping by again. We're going to have a great conversation today with Tawny. I'm going to give a little bit of a background, but I got to tell you, so I learned some stuff about Tawny today, and she has an amazing background, so I'm excited to get into it. So, Tawny, you are a seasoned mental health professional with a fascinating high-stakes career. You used to work in the police departments, and that's two police departments. We've got CSPD and we have Pueblo, and that's the community response team, right? Is it called CRT in Pueblo?
No, it's just called the co-response. But actually they are in partnership with mental health organizations that partner with them to provide that service.
Gotcha. Okay. And so in CRT in Colorado Springs, you respond for calls involving individuals in crisis and dealing with mental health challenges. And then I also learned when you came in today, so you said you used to work in at a news station. Did I get that right?
Yeah, actually, 18-year-old me, when I was going to college, I didn't really think that there was a whole lot to do in mental health unless it was being a psychiatrist. And 18-year-old me was looking at how many years of schooling that I was going to have to do. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot. So
Sure.
At that point, I ended up changing and going to media arts. And that's when I got into like news producing and media and advertising and things like that. So initially I worked for NBC down in my hometown, and then ultimately ended up going back to school after I finished being a producer for a couple of years and doing some like side reporting and things like that, and ended up probably doing more schooling than I would have had I just stayed my initial track. So I ended up finding my way back anyway. So
That's really cool. So now, but before you went into that, so you were saying that you did look at potentially being a therapist or a psychiatrist. Is that what I heard you say?
psychiatrist, yeah.
So where did that passion come from? I mean, what started it?
Oh, well, so kind of a twofold thing. I kind of have a lot of my family had a lot of substance use problems in my background. And then I just always found mental health to be very fascinating. I think I watched Silence of the Lambs, and Jodie Foster was just like the end all be all for me.
Sure.
And that was exactly what I wanted to do. And so I kind of ended up going that way. And as far as substance related, I found that initially that pretty much if you wanted to be in that field, really you had to specialize in that field. So that's how I ended up going back to get my master's. Very
interesting. And so currently, what are you doing right now?
So I work at a place called Crossroads Turning Points. It's a 3.7 level of care. Basically, it's a inpatient residential facility that addresses people at the highest level for mental health, substance use, and usually they're going through some sort of detox or have some type of co-occurring medically compromising condition or symptoms that get in the way. So ultimately, we're trying to stabilize them. Either their mental health has kind of gone away from them. There's a lot of like psychosis or mood instability. Usually they've gotten involved with, being arrested. We partner a lot with different jails and forensic departments all over the state, mental health court, things like that. or sometimes they initially here in Colorado, we have something called an IC. So you can put a person on that when they're dangerous, but it's as a result to substance use. So sometimes we'll get people that are involuntary that get sent to us for care. Or sometimes they'll come through the path of restoration for competency. They've committed a crime. They don't know whether they understand really, the ins and outs of what they did. And so they want them to get stabilized with us first and then be able to go back and participate in that process. Or sometimes it's purely mental health. So it's kind of a little bit of the gamut, but usually they have to assess through an ASAM score of like being at that level of care in order to be able to move forward with whatever their next steps are.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when it comes to mental health, that's one of the main reasons I wanted you on today, so I could learn a little bit more about it. And I know we talked a little bit before we started recording, but you have citizens around the community and they think that police shouldn't be involved in anything regarding mental health, but it's a lot more in depth than they're really giving it credit for. And so I guess to start it off, so when we look at mental health as a whole, what are some of the factors that cause any sort of mental health? Or is it drug use? Is it like genetic? Does it just develop if someone's going through some hard times, or how does that work?
It's all of the things.
All of the things.
And actually, they really can't say for sure, even now, with all that we know about DNA and genetic predisposition, that things like schizophrenia, there was came from genetic predisposition. There was a famous case where actually a pretty prevalent family that lived in Pueblo, and ended up having, I think, 13 children, and several of them, I want to say there was probably 6 or 7 of them that had schizophrenia, and it was all the males. And so they did a lot of studies on them, and many of them ended up in the state hospital. And what they found is yes, there is a genetic predisposition, but some of them had gone to use substances. Some of them, they looked at the factors of how they grew up. And so now they're saying really it could be all those things. We kind of have the chicken or egg sort of a situation where somebody might have schizophrenia, bipolar in their family, and maybe that might never have come out with them. But then they start introducing different psychoactive substances, especially things like stimulants and things that really kind of alter your chemistry. Then the mental health aspect, begins to emerge. Conversely, you'll have individuals that have used substances for a long time. So they have no history whatsoever of mental health in their family. But then because they've used substances for so long, it begins to change how their brain operates. And so then they begin to develop that. And certainly things like trauma and, being exposed to different high stress situations can also contribute from like a post-traumatic stress or a complex stress disorder perspective as well. So it can be all those things, and sometimes it's all of them, and sometimes it's a little bit. And sometimes you'll have people that have all those factors and they don't come to develop, and they have this sense of resiliency, and we don't exactly know why that is, except for looking at some, really looking at some resiliency factors. Maybe they had a good family, they had a long support system, things like that.
Yeah. Well, and so once you have it, though, there is really no curing it. It's only treating the symptoms of the mental illness. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have had, definitely there are people that they take medications and pretty much all their symptoms go away. And then there's some that no matter how many medications they've been on, and all sorts of family of medications, and nothing really touches it, and they are still going to have that. And then you'll have individuals that it came on from substance use, and even when they stop using, they can still present as if, they're psychotic.
Yeah. How often do people, let's say schizophrenia. So what I'm hearing you say is there is potentially a medication. It can get them to reduce or eliminate the symptoms depending on, their biology or whatever happens to go into it. how often do people that take medication like that, do they like relapse or forget to take it? And then before you know it, they're having verbal and audible hallucinations
All the time,
all the
all the
time.
time. It's interesting, and in fact, I did a group on this the other day that people start to do really well. Everything's going really well in their lives. They're starting to fulfill roles. They're starting to go back to school. They're starting to have relationships, and they think I'm doing okay. I don't think I need this anymore. Instead of thinking, hey, maybe the reason I'm doing okay is because
Because
I have this medication. And
yeah,
so sometimes that's kind of a learning curve for people. And then, there's definitely those outliers. It's not the traditional path, but I have met people that have had schizophrenia and find different things that work for them. Changes in diet, changes in exercise. Um, some people have really immersed themselves into spirituality and meditation and grounding and be able to handle it that way. No, is that the factor? Is that the way for everyone? I mean, I think most people at some point when they find that they have to take medication for something, that they see it kind of as a crutch. I mean, even myself, if I have to take medication, it has to be doing some amazing things for me
sure.
in order for me to decide whether that's for me or not. And I'm probably going to try some other things to see if I can do without it. And I think that's the natural gravitation for people.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree. When I was young, before I went in the Marine Corps, I had it out with my parents. We didn't get along very well. And so they took me to a counselor, and the counselor said I was a troubled kid, and they put me on Zoloft. And I didn't feel that way. I was a kid, I was getting a little rebellious, don't get me wrong, but I think most kids kind of go through that phase.
Sure.
And I didn't like the way it made me feel. And what was so funny was one day I just said, nope, I'm not taking it, got rid of the medication, and they never noticed a difference.
Yeah.
That it was so crazy. They thought I was medicated, they keep the kiddo medicated. And yet here I am, I'm not taking it. And I didn't really show any changes of behavior or anything like that. So it wasn't doing, anything really. And I'm sure there's a lot of people like that out there as well. You can try to convince people they have to eat right and they have to be healthy and they have to do all the things. But if they're not seeing a benefit to it, how do you keep them doing it?
Sure.
So circling back to the community response team. So when I was a police officer, I encountered the team pretty regularly out there. In fact, it seemed like most of the calls I handled with them were calls they were already well familiar with. It was like the repeat customers. But so what does a typical day look like in the life of CRT? Like, what is it that the team actually does?
It's kind of a couple different things. In my experience, we usually, depending upon the team that you're on and depending upon the officer, a lot of officers feel like if I don't start my day with lineup, like I'm all kinds of messed up. So for most of the officers that I worked with, and I worked with one in particular for a really long time, and we're still really we're really close. And she would always start off with lineup, so we would go there. We would kind of find out and we tried to go to different lineups all over the city to kind of get a good idea of, what sort of support they were needing, what kind of calls they were getting that were really kind of bogging them down. They didn't feel like they were making any strides with, and how we felt like CRT could help. A lot of times we would provide a little bit of education of what we could do, what we can't do, and then figure out, what kind of calls can we look out for to partner with them to be able to support. And especially if they were calls that had already happened, then we might develop some follow-ups until we got dispatched to something else. Typically, we would, otherwise, we were really listening to 911 calls that had a mental health component that we could either partner with, different responding officers, or whether we could take that off their plate completely, depending on what was going on.
And what is your team comprised of?
Usually, ideally, it was comprised of a paramedic, as well as a police officer, and then a master's level clinician.
And what is the role of each? You come up with someone, you arrive on a call for service, it's someone that has schizophrenia. What does each person in the team do?
So typically, we would actually call the police officer was like our MC. Would usually, introduce, make sure that the scene is safe, that we're good to go in. you know, assessing for any, safety components. And they would kind of do the overview as to, who CRT is, what we, what our intention is, that we're here to help, that even though, it's an officer there, they're not there because we're there to arrest them or because there's any legal concerns. We're there really to support them and figure out, how do we, obviously they reached out to 911 or someone reached out to 911 related to them. So
Yeah.
how can we support them and help them get the help that they need? Then usually they introduce they introduce the team, and then usually they hand it off to the medic to make sure that there's not any medical reasons why whatever's going on could be contributing to their presentation. Many medical disorders can mimic psychiatric disorders. So we want.
Really?
Mhm.
That's it? Like what?
So things like diabetes, if somebody has uncontrolled diabetes, they can hear things, see things. They could be out in the middle of their lawn naked and not realize, what's going on.
That's interesting. I've run into a person that had low blood sugar.
Yeah.
And he tried to fight us and we couldn't understand what he was doing. And then when we gave him some food, he's like, I am so sorry
Right.
this happens. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So, because, kind of, I'm the last kind of resort, essentially, because we want to make sure that, okay, because mostly medication, mental health treatment is really, if we're not looking at whatever the underlying reason is why they're presenting the way that they are and kind of rule that out, then ultimately we're masking whatever's going on and we're not really getting at the root of the problem. So we want to be able to rule out, like, hey, is there something medical going on that maybe we hadn't really thought of? And to include, substance use. Are they intoxicated on something? Are they showing signs of, are their eyes equal? Maybe they fell down and they have a TBI, and maybe that's why they're combative or they're aggressive or they're walking around and they don't know where they're at, those kinds of things. And then ultimately, then I kind of do a mental health assessment and figure out like what's going on with them as far as symptoms. Do they have treatment? Do they have any supports? Figuring out like what are the next steps. Is this a person that like we can get them in contact with mental health treatment on an outpatient basis, or is this somebody that needs to go to the ER, or is this somebody that perhaps needs treatment but doesn't want to, and maybe we have to look at an involuntary committal on that aspect. So we're really looking at public safety as well.
Yeah. So you go in, officer makes sure the scene is safe. Then the next person checks physical, and then the next person checks mental. And out of the three, usually you're able to kind of hone in on what's causing this thing and make steps from there to get the person treatment.
Right.
Okay. So when it comes to like law enforcement, do you have people that they see the cop automatically and they are combative, resistant just because they think they're going to get arrested?
Absolutely. And I'll be honest, my experience working with CSPD, there was not a single officer I ever met that I didn't like.
No kidding.
No kidding.
That's awesome.
I really had great things to say about all of them there. And most of them are coming across as, a lot of them have had some level of mental health training. A lot of them are really trying to be friendly and engaging with the person. And sometimes, I'm sure you know this, everybody loves a firefighter, so
Yep.
they're the favorite. If there's anybody that they're going, that they're going to love on the team, it's going to be the firefighter.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, they'll hate the firefighter, and, the cop on my team and I are just like, yes, finally, someone hates you. Because usually it's like one of us, they've had a bad experience with their mental health provider and like, I'm just the face of that again, or they've had, their preconceived notions about law enforcement. But ultimately, if once we get there and we have like kind of a team approach, we also figure out, especially when you have a well-oiled machine, a team that you've been working with for a long time and you know each other, you don't even have to say things to each other. We'll figure out who has the best rapport. So sometimes, even though mental health is really kind of my jam, if that person doesn't like me, my officer knows all my questions.
Oh, that's good. So you guys can kind of
Mhm.
tap out or kind of switch up a little bit based on how the person is
Yep.
presenting.
Because if they're amping up and it's just because I'm there, then I'm not doing any good. So I think ego is like a huge thing. If you take ego out of the factor with any of the team members, we usually can somewhat do each other's job, at least as far as like getting some initial, information.
That's really cool.
Yeah, we
So,
really loved it.
well, it sounds like an amazing unit. Now, that being said, I guess the real question, right? One of the things that came up since 2020 is, should law enforcement be involved? Um, and you see all these comments, and even to this day, there's still people out there that say, look, law enforcement shouldn't be responding to, someone that's going through a mental health crisis. And maybe that's true, right? Because law enforcement, we're not trained up to the level that you guys are. But on the flip side, there always seems to be a safety component. And so I guess my question is CRT the middle ground? Is this what should happen? Is there anything better that, departments could be doing to help mental health professionals? Or do we need to remove police from, these type of calls altogether? I mean, what are your thoughts on that whole scenario?
Yeah, it's a hard piece because I think I was telling you before we started.
Yeah.
I was a clinical director for an psychiatric hospital in Phoenix, and it was 20 years ago. So the idea of a co-response um, scenario was really in its infancy stages. CIT training for officers in general was in its infancy stages, and we were having these community meetings that involved law enforcement, fire departments, on how do we train police officers so they know, hey, it's not just a non-compliance issue, but this person is actually very distracted because there's a lot going on that people can't outwardly see. So that accidents where people get shot, because I think the public at a large doesn't really think about, hey, I need to go home to my kids at night. I need to go home to my family. And so if you're asking a person, hey, I need to see your hands, and they're not showing you your hands, naturally they've got to think about the worst scenario aspect. They have to consider that. So there's that balance of, okay, I know there's something going on, but is this person at risk to me?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that has to come first. And so I definitely think that there is a place for, yes, training for all officers in general. But I think that having a co-response team is a great middle ground to be able to identify, what is going on. And police don't need to go to every single call. You can, the 911 operators do a really good screening, as well as the crisis line for mental health, to look at, okay, is there really a risk component to this person going out there? So I got to tell you, when I was when I worked mobile teams, there was a point where they just sent mobile teams into houses. And I was up in someone's roof where they had a bomb
Oh, no kidding.
there. And there was no scene safety for me. And I was just like, okay, backing out. This is not for me.
Yeah.
There needed to be an element of scene safety. You can't always predict that. But I think as a whole, we do a pretty good job on the crisis line and 911 operators from being able to screen what's really going on. So at least we have some information going in. But I definitely think that removing police officers in general, I think, is a mistake. I think you're going to have escalated situations in which, even for myself, even being able to address what's going on and coming from the perspective of, I know what their mental health background, because I'm able to look up their history. Still, there's going to be individuals that think so strong, think and feel so strongly about what's going on, real or not, it's real to them.
Yeah.
And they're going to respond accordingly, especially if they feel like their risk is posing a danger. And in those situations, it does help to be able to have someone to say, this is what we're going to do. This is not what we're going to do, because I don't have the capacity
Sure.
to do that. I think there could maybe be a blend where all individuals on a team have some level of training and some level of safety provisions that might make responding to those calls better.
Okay.
That kind of blends a lot of things, but that's just my opinion on it.
Well, so I guess, calling out the elephant in the room, right? I know from firsthand experience, and I know a lot of officers would agree with me, when CRT can come out, CRT is amazing. Like, they help out, they help find solutions, and maybe we can turn a recurring call for service. We can get someone treatment, and we don't have any issues with them anymore because they're taken care of. They're back into society.
Sure.
But I think some of the issues that the officers have are, that's well and good, except when we have someone that is an active threat. This is where the people in the community get involved. So we go out, the person, we know he has schizophrenia, we know he has a gun, we know that, there's certain steps that are going to be huge safety factors. And to my understanding, CRT, that's not something you guys, at least initially, will go out to. Maybe after the scene is safe, you might come, but initially you won't come to it. But at the same time, from what we've heard in like the news and the civilians out there, they're like, so you're only sending the cops, that it's a mental health issue. And then when someone gets shot, then it's
Mental health.
Where was mental health, right? They say that you guys failed when that wasn't really the case. So, I mean, is there anything that can be done better to address those type of calls? Or do you think that what we're doing now is the best way? Or what are your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts are on it. So typically the way that most cities have it set up is they usually have partnerships that are happening between a mental health organization of some sort, which usually the therapist is employed by.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the police department that the officer is employed by. And then you have, the paramedic or firefighter that the paramedic is employed by. And so essentially you have three agencies making decisions.
Sure.
Right? And coming from three very different perspectives, as well as limitations. So coming from a mental health company, I know that I have background as a crisis hostage negotiator. But from the mental health company that I worked for, that was not something that, on a liability perspective, that they were willing to have me involved in.
And when you say from a liability perspective, explain that to me. So why, if you are the best person in the room and you're trained as a hostage negotiator and you have mental health training, what would the liability perspective be?
Well, I just think coming from a mental health perspective, they want to see the clinician as very different from the police officer. They're dressed in civilian clothes.
So it's a perception.
Well, sometimes it can be a perception, but also the whole idea behind it is you want this individual to want to engage with you. They want to see you very different from law enforcement, right?
Mm.
And so at the same time, so then you're employed by this mental health organization and they have an idea of, okay, we work in lots of different facilities. We never carry weapons. There's no reason for you to need to do those things. That you're not going to be put in these unsafe scenarios, right?
Sure.
But then you take that person out of that component. You're putting them in the community where they are responding to situations that could be potentially hazardous.
Yep.
And so they really don't want the clinician part of that at all. Like, the scene needs to be completely safe, and then the clinician will come in kind of like as the backup, sort of like, okay, there's no elevated risk anymore by the time the clinician is getting there. And I'm not sure that that's the best approach to it. That if you had, I feel like if clinicians were employed either by the police department, they're in-house, then at that point, that you have the officer that's there that can make sure that the scene is safe before the individual is really engaging with them, so that the therapist isn't going to get harmed. But at the same time, they can be part of the scenario as it's unfolding. And I think that that would probably aid in those situations in which they're wondering, like, why is mental health part of it? Because otherwise, let's say you take the police officers out of it. So now we're going to the house with the guy with the gun who thinks that, maybe he thinks I'm one of the demons that he needs to shoot, that
Sure.
God is telling him to shoot. How am I going to be safe? And especially, like, I'm not going to have a gun.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to make myself safe. So how could I walk into that scenario? Does that make sense? So I kind of feel like,
So, and not to interrupt, but so those people that say, well, these people are only shooting at cops because they're afraid for their lives, in a mental health scenario, which is where that's prevalent, it's really not the case. Because to what you're saying right there, if they think they're shooting at demons and things like that, it doesn't matter who shows up at the door. They're going to try and attack them. Okay.
well, and then there's also the component of, I have been in situations where the person sees me, they know that I'm mental health, they want me to be part, they're willing to let me in the door to work with them, but they don't want to let that cop in. And my cop has been directed that you do not leave that clinician's side. That clinician is not to go in to a scenario without me right there to know that they're safe.
It's a great point.
Because they're tasked with that. Like, that's number one priority, that, that the person they're responding to is safe, but their team is safe as well. And so they take that very seriously. And there's been situations that I know we could help if I could get in the door, but it's been part of that partnership to say that I cannot be without that. Where I think if I was employed in-house and there was also a level of training for their own safety and maybe some protection, to make sure that that clinician is also safe in those scenarios, because ultimately we're trained also to determine, what situations based off of what the person is saying are safe. So yeah, it is our call to say, okay, I feel safe in this scenario. I am okay. But it almost takes it out of the hands of us being able to make that decision whatsoever. I would like to see where, I think that was where the difference is here. I thought it worked really well. We had a CRT team that, responds to mental health specific calls, where when I worked at Pueblo, it was a very different scenario. It was the clinician riding with patrol. So you went to every single call. So it may have nothing to do with mental health. Now, if another officer is responding to a call that has mental health, then that officer could take you over there to be able to support that officer.
Sure.
So I kind of feel like there's a little bit of a blend that if that could happen, I think that we could be much more effective.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. So this morning, just in the vein of mental health, I just started looking around on the news. Now, this is from Fox News, and viewers and listeners, maybe you don't like Fox News. That's fine. It's on every news source. But that being said, this is an article in Connecticut. They call it the Cannibal Killer. And apparently this person who had schizophrenia in 2011, he went and attacked and killed a homeless man and then ate his brain and his eye before he was institutionalized and found not guilty by reason of insanity.
Okay.
I think I have that right. Now, the reason this article is coming up now, that was 2011, now we're in 2025, is they're saying that he is going to be released. And so, when we have...
And he's been in jail?
He's been in an institution, if I understand. This is him going up for not necessarily parole, but he's trying to get out of it. That being said, I may have made some mistakes there. Please go and correct me in the comments if you see something that I said that was incorrect. But that being said, so he could potentially be back out in the community, right? And from what it says in here, he's gone through treatment. He's receiving medication. He should be a different person coming out. But from what you told me before, all of us have made a mistake where we've forgotten to take our medication, and this person could potentially go back to essentially going after someone, potentially killing them and eating them. And so I think this is a good example.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, how is someone other than law enforcement going to handle a situation like that, especially someone that's this violent? And the reason I keep hammering that home, I want to be very clear about this. You guys do an amazing job. I love the partnership. I think that's the only way to be. When I was in crime prevention, there were a lot of people that would really hammer me and say, look, why are you doing that? You shouldn't go on this call. You shouldn't go on this call. You shouldn't go on this call. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, if we don't, then who's going to make things safe? And how do we know that someone on our CRT team won't end up on a roof with a bomb like you were doing? That's unacceptable. How are you going to protect yourself from that? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that being said, let me get my notes back together here because I had a whole bunch of notes for you and we just flew through a lot of that stuff. So looking at CRT as it is right now, okay, I know you said that this is pretty much where we should be at. Technology is changing. I think the way we do things is changing. Laws are changing. What does the future look like for CRT? I mean, how can we make it better and more, more engaging, more responsive, help the community out more? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think definitely having a component where, the team is able to hear the scans as to which 911 calls have a mental health component that they could be useful for, and being able to self-dispatch to that, I think is something that is very helpful. I think that being able to look at, I also think that if you're going to have a unit that has a paramedic, that I don't think that they should just be used for screening. I think that they should have all the medications that an ambulance has at their disposal to be able to respond in a medically compromising situation, so that they can, if we are, in my time at CRT, I responded to like a 10-car pileup, and we responded to an overdose because we were a couple blocks away. Having that medic be able to have all the things and not just be able to screen people and then refer them to an ambulance, you can do more with the resources that you have if you prepare them accordingly. I think that's important.
So what do they have right now? If they don't have everything that an ambulance had, do they have any sort of medical bag with them? Or?
Do, but essentially, as far as, I think it just differs specifically what they have depending upon the department. But being able to ultimately, there's I can't think of what those the medications are, but I know that there are certain medications that the medics on the ambulance carry, that the ones that are on like CRT or something similar don't carry, that
Interesting.
life-saving. Or at least be able to get them stabilized and us be able to get them to the hospital versus calling another unit. Because like, if you think about it in terms of why do we do this? Initially, the idea was, okay, ERs were blocked up because you had all these people that were getting into ERs because they had mental health components. And then those hospitals are having to go on diversion. They don't have enough beds available to be able to get people moving that have medical, crises going on. So really being able to sort through and prepare all the different components of the, community response, I think is probably the best way to go. So that way, if that team is the closest there, that they're able to handle anything that essentially comes their way. If you have a medical professional, you have a psychiatric professional, and you have a police officer, that anything involving, risk related to those three, they should be able to do and get them to the next, level of care on their own.
Sure.
And sometimes it's, that when you're having to then call, the fire engine, they could be responding to something else. So that's kind of what I think would be most beneficial.
Okay. From your experience going through CRT and where you're at right now, and even down in Pueblo, what is the most unique or the most, I don't know if crazy is a right word, but the most out there situation that you've ever gone on? Does anything come to mind that you really is noteworthy?
I think a couple different things, and this lends to, like we had the Club Q
Yes.
shooting. Um, and we essentially had responded to a call. It wasn't for the Club Q shooter,
Okay.
but he was there.
You're kidding. Oh, this is prior to the shooting.
Prior to the shooting.
Okay.
And we responded to that call. Now, he wasn't the person, but did we have, was there information out there, because he was being watched for different reasons, and he wanted me to come inside to be able to talk. And it was
This being the shooter or the other
shooter.
Really?
And this being one of those situations where, our hands were kind of tied. I couldn't really go in there without my officer, and there was no way they were letting the officer in.
Yeah.
And so that one really, talked with them outside, talked to the person that we were there for the call, but there was a lot that we wanted to be able to do. We wanted to be able to get inside, mainly, yes, for the mental health support, but also we have an officer with us to see what else is maybe in the vicinity to, because maybe that would have given us additional information to be able to do something, proactively in that situation, based off of what they had inside their apartment. So that kind of like sat with me. But I would have to say one of my crazier calls really had to do with my first co-response call down in Pueblo. We had gotten a 911 call that there was somebody in the mall who had a gun and was threatening to shoot themselves and shoot other people. And I was brand new. It was the first day that I actually had gone on patrol, that I was actually going to be responding to calls, that I wasn't just in training.
Okay.
And so we go to the mall. I'm like behind the officer running into the mall, and I get a call from my partner from the mental health side. They're like, where are you? And I was just like, I'm in the mall. They're like, why are you in the mall? And I was just, apparently I wasn't supposed to be in the mall, but in my mind, I'm like, okay, we're going to get the scene safe. The person is suicidal, making statements about being homicidal. So, we'll get the scene safe. Then I'll be able to talk to them, because we had some history.
Sure.
And then ultimately, the person had got back into a car and was driving around the car. So we got back into the patrol car. We're driving around. And at this point, the mall is completely like operational. There's people, going in and out. There's a gym like attached to it. And we're trying to get people outside of the mall, because there's reports that the person who was in there set up a bunch of pipe bombs inside the mall. And we don't know whether that's true or not. So at that point, we are trying to get the public like out of all the different buildings and people that are in the parking lot, and getting them to go so we can set up a perimeter. Well, then the individual comes around, and we know that they have a gun, and they come around to the other side of the mall, and they're going pretty slow, but they're coming towards us, and they just continue to turn. That we're standing there, and we're at a slow pace, but they're ultimately not concerned about running us over. And then they turn into the mall, because we have one unit following the car, and they drive completely into the mall.
Really?
So finally, like our officers like come in, and this is when we find out that there's pipe bombs, or according to the guy, there's pipe bombs inside the mall. And then we have reason to believe this, because he also says that he has a bomb with him. And we see that there's a pressure cooker in the back of the car. And so we have to obviously take this seriously. So at this point, they bring the guy out. They get him out of the car after they respond, and they're wanting to get all the people out of the mall, check to see if there actually are pipe bombs. So we want the bomb squad coming in, and they put the guy in the back of the police car with me, and he's just like, hey, he's like, do you value your safety? And I'm just like, I'm like not listening. He's like, I did this in the name of Allah, and all this stuff. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. Like, we've already got you. I'm not really concerned. And then he's just like, well, if you value your safety, he's like, I have other people that are coming here right now, and they're going to shoot me. You're in the car with me. So if you value your life, I would get out. And most of it, I was
Really?
just thinking, okay, well, he's probably full of shit. Like 95%, I'm like, he's probably completely full of shit. But that 5% of me was just like, it's the harm of getting out of the car.
Yeah, yeah.
I got out of the car, but then I saw myself on my first TikTok video where you see kind of all of us scrambling to jump out of the way of this car that's coming at us at like 5 miles an hour. So anyway, it was just funny. And then there was other people like going to the mall because they're just idiots. They're like, I need to get my outfit for, and trying to get people to understand like clearly there's something going on and you need to not be in the mall. It's just like, it's like herding cats,
Yeah.
But anyway, it was probably my most interesting. But that's also when I decided pretty quickly after that because I hadn't really had any training there and found out a lot more about like therapists that I was replacing that I really wasn't told from the mental health company, all the things that they encountered. And once I kind of heard that, I'm like, okay, I don't really think that this is what I should be doing without some sort of training because, CSPD, you have a specialty unit. They're deciding for you which calls you're going to go on, right?
Yep.
And then the scene is already safe. With patrol, if you're going to every call and you have no training whatsoever, I'm now putting that officer at risk because that officer is concerned about me, making sure I'm okay. And so their attention for themselves and their own safety is diverted. And like that didn't really sit well with me.
No, I don't blame you. That sounds like a very dangerous situation that you came into contact with. And it's funny how people sometimes they don't understand. Like you can try to tell them 100 different ways, get the hell out of here because your safety is at risk.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one time in my career when I was on patrol in Falcon, and I came up to a come and go, and someone had just placed a suspicious package that had wires and stuff penetrating from it. So now, and this is a busy come and go at a busy intersection, and now I'm trying to get everyone out, but at the same time, per our training, we don't want to use the radio because that could be something that sets off the bomb. So I got to figure out how I can get responding units to come in and block this place off. And I'm I'm a little bit more than trying to explain. I'm basically like, get the hell out of here right now. This is a dangerous scene. And people look at me like, meh, whatever. And they keep they keep walking into the come and go right next to this package and we don't know anything about it. So finally, we were so tight for resources that night. I think the only person that they could send me was a former bomb squad. He was a sergeant then, but he used to be on the bomb squad. And he came out. It took him like 30 minutes to get there. And finally, I've got the come and go cleared, but the employees refused to get out. And I told him, I said, look, I don't know what's in that, but if that is a bomb, you are well within the blast range. Why don't you come out to my car if you feel more comfortable locking up the doors? Because you know how they have like 4 entries into it. Go ahead and do that. And they're like, nah, I'm good. And I don't know.
Which
Now,
I think there also is just a sort of personality, like that if you're working at the come and go, like, shit's going to go down there. Like at some point, like, you're just like, I'm resilient. I'm good. I've got it.
well, and thank God. So the bomb squad sergeant came out and he takes a look at it. And so what it was it was essentially, I don't know if decoy is the right word. My feeling is that someone was trying to test our response to like a bomb squad situation or a potential bombing situation. So it could be a terrorist group. It could be anything. We've had that in the Springs before, a military community. And that probably did not make us look very good. You know what I mean? But we were so short-manned and we still are to this day. I mean, there's in that particular division, just that division alone, so that quarter of the city, if it was its own city in Colorado, would be the 8th largest. And there were times where we had 1 cop in that whole area. And it's like, that's a problem. But how do we get more officers to come and join the police department? No one wants to be a cop. And I can't say I blame them, right, with everything going on against police officers. So I don't know. I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, I was actually listening to your episode with Officer Garrett.
Oh, yeah.
When he was talking about the manpower that you have in New York. And I don't know if that's the same. Like, I don't know if numbers and things like that are the same, but I was thinking about that because I really do feel like that makes a humongous difference for sure. I know that my very first day that I was in Pueblo and I went to the first lineup and I was looking around, I was just like, and it was me and 3 other officers.
Okay.
And I'm like, where's the other officers? And they're like, we're at, and I'm like, oh, so there must be another precinct. Nope.
No kidding.
No. And I was just like, it was incredible. And I'm not sure what the answer is because like some of my best friends are police officers. I love police officers and I understand and I do feel that there is real credence to people having bad experiences with officers. Do I feel that there are racially motivated situations? Absolutely. I do feel that there are bad apples in almost every sort of employment.
Yeah.
There's
Occupation.
there's going to be people that are not good people. And then yes, what makes it different is okay, these are people that are in a position of power. These are people that are responsible for other people's safety. And so there's a lot of resistance to having that. And it's hard because like I've sat up with my friends, whether it be like, people in the military or people that one of my friends back in Phoenix, her husband is a SWAT cop, and I've sat up with her and her children that they think because they know he's involved in something that he's not going to come home that night, and it's heartbreaking. I also feel like people don't understand the other side of it, of what it's like to go into situations, and that you have to make those very quick decisions to keep yourself safe and to keep everybody else around you, and all that involves to really see. I don't know what the answer is other than there has to be this community shift, because in addition you had these people that are going into a position that that you're going to be at risk every single day potentially, and then to have this whole other aspect of you don't know that you're safe just because of what you do.
Mm-hmm.
It was heartbreaking for me being on a team that we had to pick what restaurants we would go to pick up food, because we didn't know if there was stuff going to be in it. We didn't know if we went through a drive-through for the coffee, if there was going to be something thrown in. We had glass thrown into one of the coffees for the officer, and this officer just as a whole was like the nicest person ever, and I think until you have this complete community shift, I don't know what the answer is, because you really do need, and it's funny because then those pockets of places like the Artifa or whatever it was,
Oh, Antifa.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then you have these pockets of like we're going to defund the police and we don't need them, but eventually things got so bad that they're like, oh yeah, we need police, so I don't know, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, other than to see it. I think of it from a trauma perspective. Some of the best times, like if you have been in you've had a trauma situation happen to you, and the person who did that to you was a male, so you might be really uncomfortable with males, but the best that you're going to do to be able to progress with your symptoms is if you work through that with a male. Because if I can have positive experiences with exactly who scared me, I'm going to have a different outcome.
Sure.
So I think that has to be the same thing with, community response and police officers in general, that the more that you're going to encounter positive interactions, the more that you're going to come to, okay, this isn't the norm.
Mm-hmm.
This is an outlier asshole, that there is going to be somebody like that's in that position of power.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I don't know what the answer is. And the scary thing is, I don't know how things are ever going to change. I mean, the reality of it is this: there was a point in time when qualified immunity still existed, where an officer, you go on a call for service, and as long as you followed the law, you followed policy, you did the right things for the right reason, you would be protected, right? On the flip side, people had real issues with qualified immunity because they felt that would lead to officer corruption, and they could get away with things that, they shouldn't be doing. And to be honest with you, when you have those gaps, they need to be looked at, right? Because I think the most critical people of police officers are police officers themselves. Because you have one corrupt officer, it makes the whole profession look bad. And look at what happened in 2020, right? We had one. I mean, there have been many incidents, and I say many, ones that were high profile that made it into the media, but you have one specific one that caused a cascade effect all across the United States that led to officer layoffs and officers leaving and stuff like that. And so police officers are very critical of anyone that's doing something they shouldn't be doing. So I think it's something that needs to get looked at. But the pendulum swung so hard in the other direction that not only did they get rid of qualified immunity, now as an officer, even if you followed the law, you followed policy, you did the right things for the right reason, it led to a result that just didn't look right necessarily in the media, you can be charged. Yeah, 100%. You get thrown, you get charged, you go in that day looking to do the best you can, and then at the end of the day, you end up in jail, for murder or manslaughter, even though you were trying to protect someone. And who wants to be in a position like that where literally, the worst thing that used to happen to you is potentially you could end up getting killed. But now you can go to prison, you can lose all of your belongings, your house, all of that stuff. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. There's got to be a better middle ground than that. How can we keep accountability while also making sure that the good officers that are serving the community do feel that they are empowered to protect the community themselves? Another issue that I've seen a lot of, just being completely honest, is officers absolutely, I won't say absolutely, that's not the right word. For the most part, they refuse to do anything proactive. And that's not because they're lazy. That's because in court, let's say they make an arrest, or proactively they try to, they see someone hanging around the side of a building. They go back there and someone shoots at them and they shoot them. The question is always going to come out, well, why did you go out there? You weren't on a call for service. You had no reason.
Person look like.
Oh, exactly. And that's going to be one of those things. The question number one, and from a distance, how can you know? We used to get told all the time, there was this little, I can't remember, it was like Blue Team or something like that, but when you conducted a traffic stop, you had to put in what ethnicity you thought the person was before you pulled them over, and then what ethnicity they actually ended up being after the traffic stop was conducted, to see, they were trying to measure, officer perception. But anyone that's ever driven in traffic, how often do you even know anything about the person that's in front of you? You can't see unless you're like right up on them. It doesn't make any sense. And so I don't know, man. The way it's going and the way they keep targeting the cops, I just don't see how you could ever have people that are intelligent and have a lot going for them, why they would ever join policing. They could probably do many other things. I'm sure you've met many people, I know I have, that have master's degrees that are patrol cops, and you ask them why aren't they doing something in like the engineering field, and they say, oh, I used to, but I didn't find it fulfilling. I wanted to be an officer to help people. But then, if they have the option, yeah, they're going to leave and they're going to go do this other engineering thing because they don't want to, get in a situation like that. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is.
I know. I wish I did too.
Yeah.
But it was the same thing with, when I was out in Pueblo and I'm sitting in a car and I'm dressed like an officer, I don't have a weapon, and I'm like, I could be part of a gang initiation that, because there's just so much hatred towards, police officers in general, that it's hard for anybody to want to do anything remotely if you look like that. If you look like you're a police officer, potentially you've got a target on your head, and that's really hard because for the most part, as with anything, most of them are really good people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it's like you said, I mean, you're going to have assholes in any profession.
Oh, absolutely.
You're going to have people that do the wrong thing. I think I read a statistic, and I'm hesitant to make any statistic I give would most likely be made up, so I'm not even going to broach that. But the article that I read, it talked about the medical field and how it described like the accidental deaths by doctors, prescribing the wrong thing or doing something, and it was astronomical compared to like law enforcement officers making the wrong decision on a shoot, no shoot, which was very, very small. You know what I mean?
To do that quickly, think about it.
Yeah.
With the doctors, you've got some time. You usually have a team there to consult things with. That officer has to make it on the fly, and you're going to hold them to accountability of having hindsight during that critical window. And it's just you're holding somebody to a level of expectation that nobody could consistently operate on and not have mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's so funny, just as a separate note, perception is like everything when it comes to law enforcement now.
Sure.
Per post, you know how we're all certified through post. Uh, they want you to have so much baton training in the academy. And I know with CSPD, they put out a policy that you could no longer have batons. And their reasoning for it was it doesn't look good. That was it. Not that it wasn't useful, not that officers don't use it to like break windows and do things that they have to do in the moment when they're actually dealing with someone that they need to get to. But at the same time, in order to certify these people as law enforcement officers in the state of Colorado, they still have to have the baton training. So what they started doing at the academy was they would give the students a baton, the recruits, they would train them for the mandatory 3-4 hours, whatever it was. And then they would say, okay, you will never use this baton again. Take it home. If it's still in your property after tomorrow, you're going to get paperwork done on you because it shouldn't be on CSPD grounds. And it just seems kind of ridiculous to me, that I don't know. I don't know. It's strange.
That it is.
So with the mental health field, how are they holding just in general when it comes to stuff like this? I mean, so you look at the mental health profession right now, you have many different facets of it. Are a lot of jobs and positions opening across the nation to where we feel that it's more relevant, or is it just a kind of stagnant where it's always been, or what are your thoughts?
Well, I think there was definitely an increase post-COVID because now you have, individuals that are isolated, and individuals during critical developmental stages of their lives not have access to anything. So if anything, it's increased. It's kind of one of those fields that, unfortunately, you're always going to be employed because there's always going to be those things. But I think that's hard too because even from our perspective, even working on an inpatient level, somebody could be actively harming themselves, and we're not supposed to touch them. Somebody could be attacking our coworker, but we're not supposed to restrain them because that person could potentially die. Like every in almost every field, everything is so liability driven that you think of the worst case scenario, and now this person can no longer do an aspect of their job or have things that are accessible to them that are useful that will help them be able to be productive or be safe. But one bad thing happens out of it, and now we're going to limit the masses instead of looking at that particular scenario and say what went wrong and address it with just that person. It's very reactive as a whole.
Yeah. And you're right, very liability driven.
Yeah.
Everything is seen through that filter anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that being said, so I think we're backing up against our time here. So to our viewers and listeners out there, if anyone is suffering from mental health issues or mental illness, or they know someone who is, what's the best step to get them that they can take to get the treatment that they need? Do you have any recommendations?
Well, I definitely think that there's a plethora of different agencies out there, really getting them in. If you it's optimal in most situations that if the individual is willing to go down and have an interview, be able to see someone and letting them know that I think people have this perception from back in the days where if you were a person who had mental health issues, it wasn't unreasonable that you could be kind of scooped away and, put in a padded room or, sent to a psychiatric hospital and never be able to get out. Not only is that just not a thing anymore, but that's just not the response, and letting them know that this is just somebody that can help you navigate through some of these difficulties. So in the most ideal of situations, if they're willing to go talk to somebody, but if they're not, I think oftentimes being able to relate it to something that they don't like that's happening in their life that they would want to have it change. Because, like as a clinician, you can come up with this very beautiful way of addressing treatment for somebody. But if that person isn't on board, if I say, hey, you're using meth every day and you need to stop. And so let's come up with a plan for, how we're going to help you stop. But they can't see themselves how Beth is causing them many problems. I'm using meth right now, and I used to be obese, and I wasn't I didn't feel great about myself. My self-esteem was low. I'm able to meet people. I'm not depressed anymore. I'm no longer laying in bed. I feel like I look better. I'm out and about more. I'm able to be more productive at work. So by all accounts, all those things are working for them. So if you can't connect what it is with them as to how it's causing problems and then and them identifying those problems and connecting that to that use, you're really not going to get them. So I think, but there are teams that can come out, even not in a crisis, but can do, follow up to be able to go to a person's home to try to engage that person if things are going down the road of getting bad. But ultimately, it is up to the person to decide if they're not posing a danger to them. Even nowadays, not even to themselves, if they're not posing a danger to someone else, you really can't force that treatment.
Do you feel that it has to be in person, or do you think that I've heard a lot about some of these companies that do like online therapy where you do. Yeah. Do you feel that that's a very good option as well?
Absolutely. And I think really COVID illustrated that is possible because that was the only way to do it.
That's great.
So for some people if I have agoraphobia and I think something really bad is going to happen to me.
What is that? Agoraphobia?
Agoraphobia. So it's like fear of leaving your house.
Oh, interesting.
I'm not going to go out and seek treatment. I'm not going to go somewhere because that's exactly what I'm afraid of. So having that access to something that is available to them on their schedule in their home works really well. Same thing with people who are very busy with their with going to work and, with their kids and all kinds of different things to have an option that is online works really well. I think even like BetterHealth or I think it's called BetterHealth.
I think I've heard of that one.
Yeah. I think they even do some minimum things, and I don't know a whole lot about it, but I think they even do some texting and stuff like that because that's the modality that this newer generation is using. They don't want to be on the phone. They want to be able to text. So figuring out what works for the person and having a plethora of those modalities is probably the best option so people can figure out what works for them.
But what I'm hearing you say is no matter what, there's probably some way that they can get connected to what they need.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really like to hear that. This has been very eye-opening. I appreciate your insights on everything when it comes to mental health. I think like a lot of my brethren in law enforcement, we don't always understand. We wish we would have had the training, but it's so enlightening to talk to someone like yourself that has a solid background in it. So thank you for bringing your expertise to the show and for helping out our viewers and listeners and giving them some feedback on what they can do. And viewers and listeners, thank you for watching this episode. If you do need mental health, if you have any concerns, if you know anyone that's struggling right now, there are options available to you. So be sure to check online, and I'm sure there's something out there to help you. Until we meet again, we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you for watching. And again, Tawny, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Mugshot Podcast. Like and subscribe where you can, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.